Hi, everybody. Adrian Plass here once more.
Yeah, and Bridget again as well. And I think it's number
It
33.
is number 33. I cannot believe it.
Well, we've continued to hear from you things that you would like to happen or things you'd like, people you'd like to be when you get to heaven. If you haven't been with us in the boat, then that will be a little confusing, but never mind. And we did hear from somebody the other day who said that what they would like is to be able to sing in tune. Well, yesterday we heard from somebody who said, well, actually, she thinks she sings in tune. She sings in a choir, but she sings alto. And what she would really like is to be not just a soprano, but the chief soprano. So she gets the descants and the solos. And what I loved about that was I was thinking, well, in heaven, actually, lots of us could be chief sopranos because I don't see any reason why not. And lots of us could get the descants and maybe even sing the solos.
Well, this is the problem, of course, with cricket, which I want to have in heaven. That if everybody scores a century, I mean, no one's ever going to actually win a match. It's going to be complete
Oh my
confusion.
goodness. And then
Oh,
it really will go on to eternity.
God will sort it out. But it'll be all right. Yeah. So, also, yesterday, I was talking about a book I wrote ages and ages ago called A Year at St. Yorick's, which is 12 Christian church magazines written by me, I'm afraid. And each one, at the beginning of the month, has a little rhyming couplet written by a man called George Payne, who is a reprobate who should never have been allowed by the editor to do that. So his little couplets really are not suitable, and I'll give you one. I'll give you one example this morning. March, like my great aunt Rosalind, March is famous for its wind. Well, that's not nice, is it?
Not
Well,
very.
that's really unpleasant. The other thing that each month has is a saying, a sort of rural saying, the sort of thing my mother used to say quite a lot. And I'll read you a couple of those as well. Here's one. Chewing moss that's soaked in beer will bring true love within the year.
I think that's seriously bad advice.
Well, I don't know. You can try it, couldn't you? Anyone who's looking for true love, get a bit of moss, soak it in beer. Don't waste too much beer on it. Chew it away, and who knows? True love might be just around the corner. Or here's
Yes.
another one to inspire you. Right. When molten rock comes flowing down, leave town.
Yeah. Now that one sounds much more sensible, really. I mean,
yeah,
I
it's a
think
very
that's a
good
notice
idea.
that could be in quite a few cities where they are based near a volcano,
That's
really.
absolutely right. And I'll have a couple more tomorrow to read you.
We also heard from somebody, and we do get these lovely stories. And this one is about a bird. Now, a couple of days ago, we were talking about improvisation and about how when a bird came down my brother's chimney, they used a hairdryer and then they used a leaf blower to try and get this poor bird out and finally had to get the chimney sweep.
Hair dryer.
I know. Well, we heard another story about a bird that came down a chimney, and this one ended rather nicely. This bird fluttered out into the room, covered in soot, terribly panicky, flying all over the place, not doing very well. And the person who wrote to us said he was very concerned and managed to find a soft towel, realised the bird was very young, didn't want to frighten it too much, covered it with this, I think it was a towel actually, opened the window and let this little bird out. And to his surprise, suddenly there was its mother, a mother rook, coming down, fussing all round this little bird, pecking at it, cleaning it up a bit, and then together they flew off. And he was delighted, so pleased he'd been able to help. Well, a couple of weeks later, apparently, he was sitting in the same room looking out the window and suddenly heard tapping. And looking down, he saw what appeared to be the same mother bird. And then he realised it was, because having tapped and he went to the window, this bird then flew up onto the fence, and there on the fence was the little fledgling and clearly her partner, and they all three sat there for a moment and then flew off. What a reward that was.
It's like a fairy tale coming true,
Absolutely.
isn't it? Yeah. I was rewarded one. Well, two people were rewarded once. We you may not remember. You will remember this. We went to lunch with a minister and his wife after we'd spoken in the church, and in the course of conversation, the minister's wife told us that she suffered from ME.
She did, yeah. I do remember. Of course I do.
And she used to have just one little capsule of energy per day. And she liked to use that capsule of energy for something useful. Mm. And on this particular day, we were very pleased to hear she'd used it for getting our lunch.
Our lunch,
That's
yes.
nice, yeah. So we had our first course. And
which was lovely.
Very, very nice. And then she said, I've done a pudding. So she went out to the kitchen and she brought back, I think it was an upside down pineapple pudding.
Yeah.
And that was fine. And then she hesitated and she said, actually, I've done another pudding. And we were a little puzzled. And she went out, she came back and she said, I've done an upside down pear pudding.
Well, of course, you went into raptures, didn't you? Because you absolutely love pears, which she didn't know.
I am a pear freak.
Yes.
So then she said, you like pears? Because I was, going bananas? No, going pears
going
over it.
Pears, yeah.
And I said, I love them. I always have. And she said, well, that's really interesting, she said, because yesterday when I was in the supermarket buying stuff for lunch and buying the pineapples and everything, all I can say is a little voice seemed to say to me, get pears. Get pears. Don't get pineapples. Get pears. And I thought, well, I don't want to get pears. Get pears. Get pears. And in the end, she got the pears and obviously hedged her bets, which I don't blame her for, and had the two puddings. Well, here's the question that we all asked then. Is the God of Isaiah and Ezekiel, was the God of Isaiah and Ezekiel and Elijah in Tesco's the day before, trying and successfully managing to hint that pears would be a better choice than pineapple? I don't know the answer to that. What I do know is that I had upside down pear pudding, and for that lady, that was a very good result.
It was. And maybe for her, and I don't actually know this, but it may have reassured her, because I do know that if you're suffering from something like ME, it takes your energy and it takes a lot of confidence, because often you're not able to join in with other people doing things to do with church or anything else really. And maybe for her, she thought, well, maybe it was God in Tesco.
Yeah.
Just specialing this little bit of energy that I've got. And what I love about both those stories, actually, in neither of them were they looking for reward.
No,
one of them was
right,
just jolly well getting lunch even though she was tired, and the other one was maybe slightly panickingly rescuing a little bird and getting it out of the window. And for both of them, they got this just wonderful reward. Yeah, but they weren't doing it for that any more than little Patrick. We were talking about him yesterday, helping me clean the tables. Well, he wasn't expecting a reward because we didn't give rewards for good behaviour. Yeah, lovely. It is a bit of a puzzle though, isn't it? Just the whole business of rewards when it comes to the Bible. I mean, Jesus was pretty clear. He told us we needed to count the cost, pick up our cross, made it quite clear for his friends that actually it was going to be even tougher for them than it had been for him. And even now, I mean, we have to look at this virus, don't we, and think that we haven't been given any mates' rates, really. I mean, people of all faiths and no faith are being attacked in just the same way.
And it's always been that way.
And it's always been that way.
Christians died, have car accidents, all sorts of stuff.
And also, if you join up because you think you're going to get a perfect life, then often you're disappointed, aren't you? I mean, we knew somebody, do you remember, who got very involved in an extreme end of the church?
Yeah.
And he was convinced, wasn't he, that if he gave money every month to this organisation...
He gave a lot of money every month. Yeah. He would be rewarded with a huge amount of money later on. How
he
this
even had a check, didn't he,
for
written
loads
out?
of money.
Yeah.
I mean, how this has developed is beyond me. It's utter rubbish.
But I mean, does that mean? I mean, is there stuff about rewards?
Well, it's interesting because, as we've often said, it's very easy for probably people in any religion actually, or any sort of belief system, to believe stuff that they've not checked on.
Yeah, of course.
But kind of, it's grown as a little mantra of attitude or belief. Now, I was speaking at a meeting once, and I actually began by saying, just let me ask you a question: does God reward us when we're good? Mm-hmm. And there was a very typical,
I can imagine,
dismal head shaking along the front row, back row. I'm not sure what they were doing, but back rows are like. But yeah, so I said, well, if you think that, you're going to have to argue it out with Jesus, because in the book called the Gospel of Matthew chapter 6, interestingly, Jesus mentions 3 ways of being good. One is giving to, I suppose, people, anybody. And he says, do that. That's good. And if you do that, you'll be rewarded. And he talks about fasting, which is where you don't eat for a while, and you kind of give that abstinence to God on behalf of someone who is needy, or some place that's needy. And he says, yeah, do that. That's good. You'll be rewarded. And he talks about prayer in one of my favorite and most sane passages in the New Testament, where he says, if you go into your room, sit with your father will reward you, because he sees what is done in secret. So that's the good news. The bad news is that in each case he says exactly the same thing. If you tell everyone about it, you won't be rewarded.
Yes, he goes on about people babbling on, doesn't he? And
yeah, he actually uses the phrase, don't babble on like the pagans, which is a verse I have never heard preached on in my life.
So he mentions reward. He actually says that if you stop babbling on and showing off, and you go into your room and you talk to your Father, then your Father, who knows what's done in secret, will reward you. But it's interesting, isn't it, to know what that reward is. I don't know what it is for you. I think number one for me is I genuinely feel heard. And that may sound a very small thing. It's certainly not tangible, but certainly for me it's important that I am heard. I really believe I am. It doesn't mean I think that because I've said something there will be a result automatically. In fact, that's something that I've learnt over the years doesn't happen. But in my teens in particular, I didn't feel heard at all, really, either at school or at home. I became very anxious and ended up with anorexia, and that was a lot to do with just not being listened to. So for me, that is a huge reward. And I know that for many people, that's what they love about going into counselling, isn't it? They finally feel heard. And I
met a lady once who said it was the first time she felt she'd met Jesus, interestingly, in counselling. And I said, why? She said, because they listened.
Yeah. It doesn't sound much, though, does it? That's one of the problems, really. It sounds very small. What about you? What would you say?
I haven't got an easy... I would agree with what you said. I think now, at this age, I would love just... I mean, the idea that God is listening to me is very special and valuable to me. So, yeah, that's great. I mean, I know Jesus then went on to say, store up treasure in heaven, which is another thing. And that's a very difficult thing to understand, the idea that things are stored somewhere and are worth something. And I don't know quite how you
I think maybe for me the other big reward is being, having always probably been last picked for teams to do with most things. It's being allowed to belong, being allowed to be part of the gang, if you like, behind the counter.
That means a lot
being
to you,
allowed
doesn't
to
it?
be given a job. I suppose we could hunt around and find all sorts of things.
Well, here's a funny one. When we were in Israel, as you know, I mean, Jesus was born in 3 or 4 different places in Israel.
Oh, yes.
Everything happened in several places. And my mobility then wasn't very good. I stayed behind when everyone went down some steps. I can't remember which one.
Oh, we were going down to Lazarus' tomb.
Oh, one of Lazarus's tombs,
Yes.
yeah. And there was a big shop outside there selling Christian rubbish, really.
Rubbish.
But there was also a very, very crippled man sitting on the wall. And I got into conversation with him. I sat on the wall because I couldn't bear going down these steps. And his name was Zid. I thought he said Sid, but it was Zid. It was a bit confusing because I said, is that short for Sydney? And he said, no, Zid. He said, he said, that's short for William.
Yes.
I said, well, never mind. Anyway, we had a fantastic chat in that little time. And I said, why do you, because he got this box with these Christian bits and pieces.
It really was tat, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Horrible.
And I said, are you a Christian or a Muslim? He said, I am a Muslim. And I said, why do you sell these Christian things? And he looked at me with great pity, obviously seeing I knew nothing about the situation, and said, we have to eat. And we had a great conversation, and towards the end, I quoted a poet to him. This poet, Rumi, said, somewhere out beyond all rightness and wrongness, there is a field. I'll meet you there. And we talked a bit longer, and just before I went, Zid said to me, that field, when we meet, will you bring me something? And I thought, something profound and spiritual is going to happen here. And I said, I will, if it's possible, I will bring you whatever you ask me for, Zid. He said, I would like a very large bar of Cadbury's milk chocolate. And you know what? I thought immediately, if I come back to Israel, I'm going to make sure somehow I have a large bar of Cadbury's milk chocolate. But if I meet Zid in some distant, mystical, difficult to define place, some field somewhere, I will pray to God that I have the equivalent of chocolate to give him, and that I can reward him for his friendship as he sat on that wall and talked to me. It was a very moving experience.
Yeah. Well, rewards, maybe. You might like to tell us about stories. We love to hear what you'd like to be or have in heaven. We love hearing. But don't feel you have to.
No.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.